to Ancient Geeks, a podcast where two older geeks look back on their younger selves, discovering everything great that was geek when we were young, and then jumping forward in time to ask the question, how do we look at all this geekery now? And we sometimes look back on it with nostalgia, which is going to be a big part of the discussion today. We were geeks before it was chic. I'm your co-host, Tom Grant.
And I'm your other co-host, Stephen Taylor.
All right. So before we get into our topic today, which is fan service, threat or menace, what have you been doing lately that's fairly geeky,
So that
Stephen?
yeah, I did. You mentioned last episode, and you started our subreddit, and I did my first contribution of it this week.
Substack.
So Substack, excuse me. I wrote subreddit in my notes because I've been thinking about Reddit. Substack, that thing. Um, so I did my first contribution to the Substack. So I would hope that the listeners would give that a look. And please subscribe. And then I've mentioned over the months we've been doing this now that I've been involved in a completion watch of Star Trek Enterprise. And this week, for whatever reason, while I was doing other things, I've caught up quite a bit on that in season three, which is in some ways better than I thought. I never saw season three, except for maybe Spotty. Although, again, maybe we'll talk about this at some point. The 9/11 of it all is just so intense.
Oh man. Okay.
So there's that. But anyway,
The
that's those
the
are
Zindi.
the Zindi episodes, yeah,
Yeah.
and Archer being all tough and putting people in airlocks and stuff. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Never thought of him as the Dick Cheney of Star Trek,
There are
but
times
maybe
in
he
season
was.
three he was.
Okay, okay. So, my solo role playing has continued. I really kind of caught the bug with that. I'm restraining my impulse to not buy lots of other role playing games that can be played solo or are designed to play solo, because that back in my role playing days was my Achilles heel. I had a low attention span for any one particular system. I would just jump around. Um, I wrote something. The other thing I did was I wrote something for the Substack about science fiction and fantasy being primarily short story
Yes.
sorts of media, and that got me reading short science fiction again, both contemporary and the older classic stuff. So that's my other thing, and I'm probably going to write something for a future Substack post about why is so much science fiction somber. I don't know why, but anyway, it's a topic I'll save for a later date. How about soundtracks? So we can't afford any to actually play any of these on
Yep.
this podcast, but what would you
So
choose as a pod as a
I,
the
I
soundtrack of fan service?
I did a little research as nerds do about songs about fans. So I started off with, well, maybe there's Taylor Swift's Long Live, but this 2010. It's weird to pick Taylor Swift for a bunch of old dudes, and that's just too recent. So then I got to the Rolling Stones' We Love You, which is 1967, which is much
Oh, that's
more in
good.
our zone. But the one that hits the perfect sweet spot for me is AC/DC's For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, 1981. So in that regard, pick up your balls, load up your cannon for a 21 gun salute and or a 21 reference salute, I think. So that's my fan song.
Okay, mine. I originally thought there was a Paul McCartney and Wings song, Magneto and the Titanium Man.
Oh, there you go.
But I think they were just sort of proclaiming that they were genuine comics fans. There's a great picture of Paul and Linda McCartney with Jack Kirby. You can find
Hmm.
out there on the internet. But I'm going to pick a little earlier song, which is "Ramble On" by Led Zeppelin, which has Tolkien references in it.
There you go.
Um, anyway, so that would be
Or,
my pick.
or is that just a commentary on the fact that we're going to ramble on?
Ramble On. That could be almost the theme song for this podcast
There
series.
you go.
Yeah. I also just watched the documentary Becoming Led Zeppelin, which is terrific. I recommend it to anybody who's a Led Zeppelin fan. Okay, on to our main topic. So we're going to take maybe slightly different or majorly different positions on
Yes.
this, but
Well,
so I thought by framing it as a debate, at least kind of putting the resolved out there, as our starting point. So resolved, fan service is a good thing for geek culture. And one or both of us may disagree with this point, but and by good thing, I put down it can help inspire creativity and good storytelling. It can make for an enjoyable story. It can keep people engaged with a particular genre or a particular property within that genre. It can build and sustain community. Would you put anything else on the list of benefits of good fan service?
I think that's a good place to start. I mean, and again, I think we'd warn the listeners that this is a very different episode. This is different than anything we've done to this point. We're not really talking
Yeah,
about a particular property.
yeah,
I think there's going to be a lot of Star Trek talk and a lot of Star Wars talk and maybe some other things as the spirit leads, so to speak.
yeah. I've got
But
I've
this
got
is
some books to
yeah,
talk about too.
the different kind of conversation. Tom and I've been talking about this offline for a while and thought it would make for an interesting episode of the podcast.
Yeah, yeah, and we've thrown around the term fan service quite a lot in previous episodes to the
Yes,
point where we both said, well, maybe we need to pin down what we really mean by this and why
yes.
we're dismissing things as being just fan service. Maybe if we thought more deeply about this, there might, it might be more to this fan service thing than we thought. So you actually did research. So you're coming to this debate with facts, you bastard.
I know it's terrible. Um,
Well, tell us about the
so,
research.
I, okay, let me start here. Yeah, this is going to be the most probably annoyingly pinhead academic conversation we've had on the podcast, at least at times, until we start arguing about jokes from lower decks or whatever. But nonetheless, so so here's where I started with all this. I am, I think, more positive toward the generic, or at least how I perceive the generic concept of fan service than you are. You're more likely to use it in a pejorative sense, I think. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's not that I don't understand the pejorative application, but to use an analogy that I told you previous and it rolls around in my head, it to me it's like the term virtue signaling. Why do I say this? I say this because I think the terms can have both sort of positive and negative connotations. So on the one hand, I understand, let's take virtue signaling for a moment. I understand the notion that people might do things to at least pretend to signal a particular virtue what they don't really hold, right? So, you put a certain sign in your yard of how tolerant you are, but you're really not a very tolerant person. So you're really trying to it's like stolen valor of some virtue. By the same token, I think a lot of people legitimately try to signal that they have a certain position that might be considered virtuous on a particular topic. And I don't think there's anything wrong with signaling, I like tolerance or I like, being nice to people. That's not a bad thing in my mind, even if maybe it's not as well developed or applied as one might want it to be. Similarly with fan service, I feel like on one level, I get the notion of, and we'll talk about it in great detail, that people pander to fans or make bad choices because they think it'll make fans happy, or they're gratuitous in some way in the application of a particular story beat, visual, or whatever the case may be. But by the same token, I guess part of my brain says, well, is not the purpose of a particular franchise, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel Comics, or whatever, is it not at some point to in fact service what fans want? And sometimes I find that there can be even the opposite, where there's such a concern about, well, we don't want to alienate new people that we don't actually pay attention to what fans might want from particular property. So I think there's this universe to talk about it. Now, in terms of the research, and I was quite surprised that I didn't know this until just recently preparing for this podcast, because I had this generic notion that the word fan service meant kind of as what I've already described, which is this idea that there's some pandering or some use of references or Easter eggs or maybe even an appeal to nostalgia within a particular product, and that therefore was quote unquote fan service. I started where one often starts, although any former students listening, cover your ears. So I looked at Wikipedia first, but then I also looked at some other areas to confirm. And I was kind of surprised to find that I think maybe in the back of my head, this tickles something that I had read before. But apparently the concept of fan service originally is applied to anime and manga and has to do with sexualizing characters in a way to appeal to male audiences. And I had this confirmed by looking at, I mean, Urban Dictionary has a pretty good definition of it that sort of fits that. Fan service refers to scenes designed to excite or titillate the viewer. This could include
Yeah.
scantily clad outfits, cleavage shots, and so forth. Even, various other, I found certain anime message boards that were talking about this. And so,
Well, and we should say there's a lot
yeah,
of this
yes,
in the geek world.
yes, oh, yes. No,
Yes. So
and
this gratuitous sexualization is part and parcel of a lot of comics,
yes, oh,
that
yes.
a lot of boobs and butts in the comics.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, when people look at Star Trek Into Darkness with the extremely gratuitous Carol Marcus in her underwear
Yeah,
scene.
that was just clearly part of the plot, Tom. And
Yeah,
that's just the way things work.
or in Starship Troopers the movie, the shower scene. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
yeah,
in fact,
the transporter didn't work for Carol Marcus. It had
that's
forgotten
right.
to include her
That's right.
clothes.
That's just the way it works, man.
Yeah.
So no, in fact, the Urban Dictionary definition specifically notes shower scenes, and which again, given the time period we're talking about, this makes me think about how many quote unquote comedies of the 1980s was there someone, of course, Porky's being the best example of a shower scene
Right.
being sort of part of the quote unquote comedy, but sort of all of that is quite present. I feel like there was a time in the 1980s where there was this countdown to when we see at least one boob in this movie, and then we'll
Right.
move on from there. It's like it was very strange.
Well, and the cinematic examples are countless.
Oh, yeah, countless.
Yeah.
So I think that this sort of sets the tone for this. Now, clearly, and I saw plenty of this as well in doing a little research. There's plenty of people that just talk about this in the context of references and nostalgia, especially when it comes to Star Trek,
Mhm.
which I'm sure we'll talk about quite a bit. So that's kind of the parameters that I've laid down or thought about. I mean, I know that we've talked about. Well, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah. So I think yeah we were talking a little bit before we pushed the record button, but I think definitely both those elements are part of fan service. If you take it as a neutral term, and especially if you take it as a pejorative term, that there is this referential aspect of it,
Hmm.
which, as we'll get to, can be good or bad. And also the gratuitously sexualized aspects of it. And you also threw in humor
Yeah.
when we were talking earlier,
Well, yeah. I mean, so one, I want to be
like
clear.
parodies and,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
humor. What I was really sort of thinking about is humor often is based on references, and that really not exclusively. And some humor can be overly referential to the point that it only works if it's kind of like inside jokes, right? You and I might have a joke that nobody else understands, and that's not a very good joke, I suppose. Except if it makes me happy, I guess it makes me happy. But but even I was just saying, like even like which I saw Jerry Seinfeld a couple years ago in Birmingham, and a lot of his humor is, as we is often described as observational, and if you're not paying attention to the same observations he is, even those jokes don't necessarily work. There's always some amount of reference, I think, in sort of all of
yeah,
art. And I don't know that a totally unique experience is difficult. And I made a reference to take a Star Trek reference to Darmok, the whole thing about this idea of speaking in metaphor and one of the things that I really find interesting about that show, and I think about it a lot actually, is how much of daily language really is in that category. We just don't think about it because we're so used to what these terms mean.
right,
And also, if you ever try to learn another language and trying to really understand idiomatic expressions that just don't literally translate is a challenge
right,
because they are referential in some way. So, I mean, I guess the only point about that is that reference is sort of inherent to communication and to art to some degree. It's just a question, I guess. And so, a lot of this is, I think, about not so much about whether something is good or bad, but maybe the level and quality thereof. But to make sure that we're clear about one thing, when I would defend the concept in my own mind or in chats with you or in anything I may have said on the podcast, I never thought of the fan service, the sexualized part of the fan service.
yeah. I didn't
And,
think of it either.
and
I
I,
was heavy on the reference.
yeah, it's the references. That's what I'm thinking about, or the degree to which. Well, I'll lay an initial example down before we get into the weeds. And I mentioned this to you, I think, a couple of weeks ago on the phone. So one of the sort of opposite of fan service that I found annoying early on is Star Trek: The Next Generation. Gene Roddenberry didn't want, for whatever reason, there to be a whole lot of references to the original series. Which, on the one hand, I understand you want it to stand on its own as the thing, but by the same token, it's part of a broader universe. And I remember, the second episode, well, third if you count Encounter at Farpoint and 2 Points, is The Naked Now. I think that's the third one. It's very early on anyway. And it's a direct sequel to an episode of the original series, The Naked Time, about this disease that makes people act like they're drunk. And okay, fine. So on the one hand, it is a reference, it's a direct reference, but then there's a whole scene that always annoyed me, especially early on when I watched that episode, which was somebody pulls up on the computer that this happened to the Enterprise, the original Enterprise, and they all kind of act like, huh, I guess I've heard of those guys. I'm like, come on. I mean, that's
Right.
to me,
How
it's the
many times
opposite.
did they say the Federation, the galaxy, the
It's
universe?
like your ship is named after that ship. It has the same registry number with a D put at the end. I think you
Yeah.
know who James Kirk, and at that point, of course, it had not been established. Spock's still alive as an ambassador. You should know who these people are. So there's this balance, right, between
They were just
recognizing,
insecure. They
sure,
they just were pretending they didn't know who
that's
it
right.
was.
That's right. So, and by the same token, you can get, way overboard, and be all references all the way down. And I understand that's a problem as well. So there's a balance here.
Right. So
I guess I would
there's
just
this
throw the,
there's the setting aspect of it, right?
yeah.
You can't avoid if you're going to make something in the Star Wars universe or the Star Trek universe or Marvel Comics, DC
Hmm.
Comics, there are things that you would naturally expect to be there. Right? So like if you like we were talking about John Byrne's Fantastic Four, when Galactus shows up in New York City,
Hmm.
it's not just the Fantastic Four who are there. Right.
Right.
There
Exactly.
are other superheroes who would certainly naturally say, "Oh my God, our planet's about to be destroyed. I should do something about that."
So, in general, I find that, so and this maybe is where the debate lies. Because to me, what I want to think it's inevitable that if a property, a franchise, whatever term you want to use, a universe exists for multiple decades through multiple iterations and creators, that you're going to become increasingly more self-referential, sort of definitionally, because you just have a world to work. I mean, the first series of Star Trek can't be referential definitionally, right? Because there's nothing to refer to.
Right.
But eventually you're going to have a shared history. So then it becomes a question of how much are you relying on the richness of this now fictional history that you exist in, which therefore requires some level of self-reference, and to what degree do you over-rely on or jettison quality storytelling to make those references?
Yeah, and that's where I get
Yeah,
worked up about fan
sure,
service. It's when it's condescending to the audience. Where I'm just going to dangle these shiny, noisy keys
right.
in front of you, or other people call these things member berries.
Hmm.
I'm not going to have any creativity whatsoever. I'm going to just, take my action figures and out of the box and pick a couple at random and make up a
Right.
story about them. That's I think pretty bad, and it's lazy. I mean, it's lazy. It's like,
Mhm.
there's cars like almost like a social contract that if I'm going to spend my time or money on something, I'd like it to be of good quality,
Sure.
and quality depends on somebody making an effort.
No, I think that ultimately, in my opinion, all of this is ultimately about quality more than anything else. Um, but also, trying to balance off the known and the new, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So I think that, I put, I put a list of things that fan service is not. It's not continuing telling stories in a particular setting. It's not continuing a particular stories. It's
Hmm.
not inherently bad, though there are bad versions of that. And it's not revisiting a particular story in a new and interesting way.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So I derailed you. So
No, no, you did not
yeah.
derail me. I
Okay.
think I had exhausted that particular
Yeah.
thread of thought.
So you did some research into Star Trek
I did.
and had some interesting results from that.
So yeah, and this is all detailed in the Substack entry that I wrote this week. Although by the time you hear this, it'll have been up for several weeks. Um, and I got curious, partially because this conversation about new Star Trek as it pertains to reference issues. Because I mean, again, let's sort of set the stage, right? With Lower Decks, which is the animated Star Trek comedy-ish comedy series, it's there's a lot of references in that. It really is, I think, made by fans for fans, and a lot of it is referential. I think I'd have to watch it again to say how much it could stand on its own. Then that's a legitimate question, but it is referential. And then the other thing that is Star Trek Picard, especially season three, which is very much nostalgic because the reunion season, right? The TNG cast is
Yeah.
back together in Picard season three, and then there's some other examples of this. But I was sort of curious. I had this question in my mind about the degree to which people complain about new Star Trek, because there's a lot of complaining about new Star Trek online, a lot.
Right.
But there's a lot of complaining about a lot of things, right? There's a whole contingent of people that complain about Star Wars and Doctor Who, and you can go on and on.
Yeah, and it's all like they complain about the new Who or the new Trek or
Yeah, yeah, it's always
yeah,
new,
or
and then of
Disney
course,
Star Wars or
or
I'm not saying there isn't anything objectively wrong about those
right.
objections, but it's often focused on this isn't what Star Trek is, or this
Well,
isn't what I remember
exactly.
Star Trek to be like, or anyway.
So in other words, so what sparked part of this in my mind to be more specific is that there's an interesting juxtaposition between nostalgia driving some of this stuff and then people griping that the new stuff is bad.
Right.
And sometimes griping because they say they don't like the nostalgia. And I was just curious as to what is there any way to try to measure what the actual popularity of this stuff is? I'm going to caveat that a system like I used the IMDb ratings for the episodes because I was just curious how they played out. And I'm aware that the ratings like this can be inflated because people that like things tend to rate things, but also they can, there's this whole thing in recent years of rating bombing where people go in who don't like something for some very specific reason and just are very negative in the ratings,
Yeah.
often unfortunately based on race and gender that
Right. But there's
complains
also
often.
shilling too.
Yeah, and there's shilling. So you have
Yeah,
both
so there's a
directions.
distortion in both directions, right? There are no shills or bombers for the Spock's Brain episode of the original series.
Well, so this becomes the interesting question, right? So I'm like, so cross comparability, what would I see if I looked at these ratings? And at first I'm like, I'm not going to do this work because it's just too much to try to put this in a spreadsheet. And then there's a whole conversation in the Substack about my experiment with AI for good and for ill. But it made it possible for me that otherwise I would not have put 927 or whatever the number is episodes into a spreadsheet and try to rank them. So what I found is that one, I was surprised that the the uh, the new Star Trek shows ranked higher than I expected. I really, if you were to take the bulk of complaints online and take them seriously, you would think that they would be that 90s Trek would be like ruling the roost, like TNG is the best, and maybe DS9 and Voyager,
Mm,
but that the new Star Trek would be way down the list. Well, weirdly, the three highest rated shows based on IMDb is Star Trek Prodigy, Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks.
yeah,
Followed by Enterprise, which also surprised me. Like Enterprise, then Picard, then DS9, then TNG, then Voyager, then the original series, TAS, and then Disco. So now the fact that Discovery was at the bottom did not surprise me. Now, again, the range of rankings is, I think, like it's like points. I can't remember. 0.67 is the range. It's not that big, but
right.
and the shows all are in the sevens except for TAS and for Discovery. They're both in the sixes. TAS is a 6.6 overall average rating per episode, and Disco is 6.22. The rest of them range from 7.35 to 7.97. Now, Prodigy shocked me to be at the top, right? Now, it also has by far the fewest votes. like by thousands. So it's clearly not been watched that much.
Hmm.
But the fact that the other ones are as high as they are was just I was very surprised. And then but then I looked at the episodes, and the episodes it's a little more dominated by 90s Trek. But I also would say that I was not surprised on balance by the way the ratings worked out. I mean, the ones that I thought would be at the bottom were at the bottom, and the ones I thought would be at the top on balance were on the top. So I felt like pretty good about it, actually, that it reflected general perceptions of the shows. But, one thing I did find is a lot of the ones that are arguably nostalgia driven did make it toward the top of the rankings.
Hmm.
What did you think about what I found?
Well, exactly. I think that I effectively I agree with you strongly with kind of your conclusions from that, and I think you made a very convincing case that the real interesting ratings were the ones about the episodes.
Yes,
That the series themselves, like Discovery, whatever you want to think of it, does inspire very strong negative opinions
it does.
among a lot of people who are very online,
Yes,
and I was a little surprised actually that the animated series was as low as it was. But maybe not a lot of people have seen it, or those
right,
who have seen it, kind of recognize the faults of the show, and they don't necessarily kind of put it in the same context you and I would as
right,
the fourth series of the fourth, yes, the fourth season of
right.
the original series. Um,
Oh, well, quite clearly, I mean, again, I averaged out how many rankings there were per episode. So, like, the one that has the most rankings actually is Picard. It has over 6,000, almost 6,500 rankings
yeah.
on average per episode. Prodigy has an average of 425, so it's just radically, radically lower, which again
Hmm.
calls into question the comparability of that number to the rest of them. So,
Yeah.
but TES only has 1,130 average
Right.
per episode. So I think probably a lot of people haven't watched TES, and also I'm sure a lot of people get turned off by the animation,
Yeah.
which is not, as we've discussed, not that great, and the repetitive music, and sorry, it's coming to
Which
my
is
head now.
playing in my head now. It's
Exactly, I know.
playing
It's
in
so
my
true,
head now.
so true.
But I thought, like 90s as the center of gravity for
Hmm.
Star Trek made a heck of a lot of sense because there was a lot of good Star Trek.
Sure, and a lot of Star
And
Trek.
yeah, and it did build obviously on what came in the past, but it wasn't leaning so heavily into the fan service or into the references, I should say.
So,
Uh,
so to that point, right?
Occasionally.
Okay, well, so again, it's all in the Substack. I put all of the episodes that were ranked 9.0 or higher, which
Hmm.
is like 21, I think 21 episodes out of 927, I think. There are four that have a 9.4 rating, right? And I'm not surprised necessarily by any of them, although two of them are The Inner Light and In the Pale Moonlight. In the Inner Light being the ever popular flute episode with Jean-Luc Picard and TNG, and then In the Pale Moonlight is the Cisco does an espionage slash political move to get the Romulans into the war against the Dominion, which is I think is one of the best. Those are both two of the best episodes of Star Trek. I think I don't have a
Oh,
problem with those
definitely.
being.
Definitely.
Now, what's interesting about The Inner Light is it's the least Star Trek one of the least Star Trek episodes of Star Trek, right? Because
Right.
it's almost entirely about Picard being somebody else in a different place in a different time. There's no starships, no Federation, no nothing, right? It's almost a Twilight Zone episode in that regard, right? It's almost a self-contained
Yes.
story.
Hmm.
And so that's interesting to me that it's one of the top. And then, of course, In the Pale Moonlight is very much centered in, but it's also, a very intense political and somewhat
Intrigue.
intrigue and
Someone
also,
wrestling morally with what's the right thing to do.
yes.
Yeah.
But then the other two that get 9.4s are Trials and Tribulations and The Last Generation, which is the conclusion of Picard season three and of Picard as a series. Now, those are both certainly nostalgia fueled episodes, right? Trials and
Absolutely.
Tribulations is this anniversary. I forget which anniversary it was of Star Trek, and they meld together the DS9 crew with the TOS crew, and a pretty impressive. Even now, I think it's an impressive integration of those into this TOS episode. And but it definitionally relies upon some knowledge of past Trek to make full sense. I suppose you could watch it. It has enough coherence that you don't have to, you could watch without knowing what happened in the previous episode, but it certainly is enhanced by that knowledge. And of course, The Last Generation is the triumphal conclusion of the TNG reunion, which is again this
Hmm.
90s Trek crew reunited, including the Enterprise D itself. So, spoilers. If you've gotten this far and you care about spoilers, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Regardless. So, but I just thought it interesting that that is in fact the case. And that, again, that was the highest rated season of Picard. Again, part of why I think this, I'll digress and say that part of the reason I found this fairly valid as a measure, season two of Picard does not rate that well, but season three rates highly well. And I would also point out that season two relies on some nostalgia, right? It's the Q
Hmm.
thing, and that did not get the same kind of bump as the third season did. And if we look at some of the other highly rated ones, I would also point out, right, that Fisher Quest, which is the highest, it's a 9.0, it's the highest rated Lower Decks episodes, is heavily reference driven. It's all kind of
Yeah.
Paul's in that one, and every Kim and all the multiverses in that one,
Which
and
was really funny.
oh, it was great. And Garrick
Yeah.
and Bashir, it was fantastic. I mean, whether it deserves to be one of the top of all time, that's a different debate. But
Well, that's
it is.
so there's sort of a recency
Yeah,
effect
there is that
at
too.
work there.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, and that's a word I meant to put in the essay. I think part of this is recency bias. I guess I was surprised to some degree how much there was less negative recency bias, also given all of the supposed hatred of all this stuff
Right.
by certain fans.
Hmm.
So it kind of washes out. But anyway, it was an interesting process for me to go through all this.
Okay. So that might be a good segue to talking about good examples of fan service.
Yeah, fair, fair.
And we really almost have to come up with two different terms for good and bad fan service because we're also going to obviously talk about the bad examples of fan service in our estimation. But let's keep calling it fan service for the moment. So I've got a long list. Do
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
want to kind of go back and forth with our examples?
Sure. I
So
mean,
if the trials and tribulations is one, right?
yeah,
I think so. Why did we like that episode?
so I mean, and he's all this sort of. I think it raises the question of, and again, the terminology is on point. Like, is it fan service or is it something else? But I think it works. Well, it's just a good story. It's fun. It celebrates its references. It's not references for references' sake necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, I think. I mean, it's a high quality output, right? The visual effects are quite impressive in terms of
Hmm.
integrating the DS9 crew into the TOS setting. It has its own internal story. It's not just about, I guess, again, to your point about member berries. Hey, look at Spock. Hey, look at Uhura. Hey, look at Kirk.
Right.
There's like a story going on, and in some ways, I would say that the the wraparound trouble with tribbles part is not as in your face as it could have been.
Mm.
It's there enough that it all makes sense, but it's well done in terms of the perspective of the DS9 characters vis-a-vis the TOS characters.
Right.
And there's some limited interaction, but it all works, right?
Yeah.
Like the
And
scene,
the writing is just great.
the writing's great.
It stands out aside from the technical
Yeah.
achievements of the episode. There are moments in that are extremely memorable, like
Yes.
little bits of dialogue. Like those are Klingons.
Yeah.
Uh,
We don't talk about it to outsiders. Yeah, it's great.
that I remember 30 years later,
Yes.
or when Dax, says, "Oh, isn't he handsome?"
Yeah.
It's not the person that
That's right.
that Cisco thought it was,
Right.
is you're
Exactly.
referring to.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, there's just like these little moments in there that are just not accidental. It was because of somebody sitting down at their typewriter or word processor and cranking out something of really good value
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and quality.
And I'm sure it rates highly because one, the first episode is highly loved.
Oh yeah.
It of itself is in like it's like 8.7, so it's like right outside
Yeah.
the range of 9 to begin with.
Yeah.
And the technical part I think does help elevate it, and it's just fun. It's a rewatchable episode,
Hmm.
I think.
And I would contrast that. I don't want to get too much into the bad examples, but
No,
a lot
please.
of bad examples might extract characters from the past and throw them
Hmm.
into a story, but they're not as well written. And so you're sitting there in befuddlement, like, what is going on here? Why are these people acting so stupidly? Because stupidity is often the driver of plot in the hands of
Yes.
bad writers. Why am I
Yes.
watching this? It's those kinds of fan service moments that really turn the term into a pejorative, not trials and tribulations.
Right. 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 Right.
Okay,
Um,
so we talked about lower decks.
yeah.
What's another thing that you would put into the list of fan service? Maybe something not Star Trek related,
Ooh, that's a well.
or if it's all Star Trek on your list, that's fine. I didn't
I
mean to
guess I've got
preempt you.
Star Trek on the brain. Well, the one that came to mind was the Strange New World episode, which also is in the top. It's 9.1. Was A Quality of Mercy, which is this redo of Balance of Terror.
Hmm.
If Pike had not died.
Right, the first Romulan episode where
Yes.
they're playing cat and mouse trying to track down this cloaked Romulan vessel.
Right.
The
And Pike,
submarine episode.
the submarine episode. I think that one, which is very much tickles certain nostalgia centers. I don't know if you, but again, I think you can watch that one and not necessarily have remembered the original one, because it has within it the story is a morality play about Pike's choices and whether he can avoid a particular his bad fate of the beeping chair.
Well, also too, I thought it was an extremely mature, profound look
It was.
at what doing the right thing means. That
Hmm.
if you put a different captain into the chair, on the bridge of the Enterprise, and
Hmm.
they make completely valid choices,
Right.
one result might be successful, and the other one might be a terrible disaster. And they're both motivated by the desire to do the right thing in an
Right.
extremely tense and dangerous situation, but vastly different consequences. And that's a good use morality. I think that's a good morality play to kind
Hmm.
of sit on after you watch it. And again, that didn't happen just because they decided to harken back to an old episode of the original series. It's that somebody did some really high quality writing.
Right. Right. And I think this hits on a theme, which is it's as much about the quality question as it is about anything else, in
Yeah.
my mind.
Yeah. So I would throw in a kind of a whole subgenre that one could say is fan service, and that's the Sherlock Holmes pastiches. So since Arthur Conan Doyle is long gone, there's no one to continue writing. He can't continue writing Sherlock Holmes stories, but lots of other people have. And
Hmm.
so there are people, who have written books that, take Holmes and just continue the adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Dr.
Right.
Watson. Like the 7% Solution was, one of those. Or there are the ones that look at the Holmes stories from the standpoints of other characters or continue their adventures. So Mycroft Holmes as the protagonist, Irene Adler, Sebastian Moran. If you're not a Holmesophile, I'm sorry that I'm making deep references here, but these are prominent characters either through the whole Holmes stories or in a particularly beloved story. And they thought, well, it'd be really interesting to make that person the center of another Holmes tale. And then to get geeky for a moment, there have been a lot of Holmes meets fill in the blank sort of
Hmm.
stories that fall within the geek domain. So there was the Holmes Dracula file, was a
Right.
book in the 70s that combined Sherlock Holmes and Count Dracula. There have been Cthulhu-esque Holmes stories. I've got a couple of those anthologies on my Kindle. There is Batman meets Sherlock Holmes. There's Holmes faces the Martians in the War of the Worlds. And so these are all really fun. And not everyone is a huge success, but I don't read them and get offended by the laziness and pandering and member berries that I do from some of the other things we're going to
Right.
talk about.
So, I mean, this raises a question in my mind, right? I mean, and I mentioned it offline to you, but I'll bring it up here. It's at least a sideways version of what I said before, which is, are sequels fan service? Is the continuation of things fan service? See, I'm not even sure that I would consider what you've just described as fan service. I think it is, and this gets to the heart of maybe my own thinking about all this, which is by definition, um, writers want to be read, and certainly the owners of IP want to sell us more IP.
Hmm.
So is this just not the marketplace in operation? Because in some ways, I mean, Strange New Worlds, you could argue as a totality is fan service, right?
Hmm.
That starting with the very end of the last episode of season one of Discovery, when they do that whole what ship is calling us? Oh, the call sign's coming up on the screen. It's 1701. And we all know what that is if you're a Star Trek fan,
Right.
which presumably most people watching it are, but some people might not know. But if I ask my wife and she's watched plenty of Star Trek, maybe under duress, but she's watched plenty of it. If I asked her what's the registry of the Starship Enterprise, she probably wouldn't be able to. Maybe she would. But so that is clearly to some degree fan service to have the Enterprise show up, to have Pike show up, to have Spock show up. This is tickling a particular desire that fans might have about this property if you're going to set it in this particular moment in time. And in fact, part of me, I don't have a real good sense of this, but well, a real good example. I have a sense of it. There was a time because of budgetary constraints and because of maybe just contractual constraints that if even if you set a show in a certain time frame that you knew other characters existed, you wouldn't reference those characters because it was just
Hmm.
too much of a hassle,
Right.
money wise, to do it. And to be in the era, especially at that point in time when they were throwing money at everything on streamers 5 years ago, it is in some ways fan service, and having the fans kind of wanted Strange New Worlds and they got it. I don't. I think that was in fact some ways a response to fan response, the same way that some people want Star Trek Legacy, which we probably won't get. So, how much of this is just the market fulfilling a demand, or
Well, I think
capitalizing on
there's
an
I
existing
think there's
property?
also, that you kind of express the difficulties of reusing particular characters or
Hmm.
properties and so forth. Sometimes it's actually easier, right? It's to do that than something new.
Sure.
It
Oh
might
yeah,
be
yeah.
that you already have the costumes and the sets and the writers and the people who know the show and so forth, and then it's just the path of least resistance, especially from like a TV or movie production
Sure.
perspective, to do a sequel of something that is already out there, or to kind of reboot it, as
Sure.
the endless efforts to reboot things have shown.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, Fonzie didn't show up on Laverne and Shirley all the time, even though they both lived in Milwaukee, because it
Right.
was just too much of a hassle. Even though the fans would have loved that, they probably would have tuned in to see Fonzie on Laverne and Shirley on a regular basis. But you're not going to do that.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess my question is maybe to be more specific to your list. So, Sherlock Holmes meets Dracula. That's kind of a cool idea,
Right.
right? So, is that fan service or is that trying to
Oh,
find things that fans like? I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, what's the
well,
difference?
I would say it definitely is fan service, because you see a book that's titled The Holmes Dracula File and you say,
Hmm.
"Ooh, that's
Yeah,
interesting." It's also something brand new, right? It also it does stand on its own. And although, I think certainly it benefits from having everybody know who Count Dracula is.
right.
There's no need to go into a lot of backstory there, or Sherlock Holmes. Everybody knows who Sherlock Holmes is, and maybe they don't. see every reference to some story, that a Holmesophile would, but
Right.
it was a good book.
Well, to press the point a little bit more, is the new Superman movie fan service because it exists?
Because Superman exists. I think
No,
it helps.
because, well,
Well,
I
so
mean,
so like the person I saw it with
right.
did not know, and I think I mentioned this when we did
Yeah,
the
you did.
review. Yeah, did not know who Green Lantern was.
Right.
It didn't know Guy. Certainly didn't know Guy
No.
Gardner. And was sitting there waiting for Batman to come along and punch him in the face.
Right. Right.
But
Right. Right.
but
As one does.
it was still something that she enjoyed, right? So it was
Right. Well, I mean, this is what I'm struggling with, I guess, on one level. So my point is not to be too oblique about it and maybe to be overly overt about it. It's like, as you said, you're in the bookstore and you see the Holmes Dracula file. You like Holmes, or you maybe like Dracula, maybe you like both, and go, oh,
right,
cool, I want to read that. Or maybe I only know one. It doesn't matter. But if I go to the movies and then see a poster for a Superman movie, oh, I like Superman. I'll go, I mean, what's the difference? And how is one, what, so what, I guess my part of, I
well, no
guess,
one's going to say
part,
who is this Superman.
no, of course not. Of course not. But
Tell me more. Yeah,
I mean, so I guess part of what I struggle with this concept is that, yes, there are some things that are totally original that I
hmm
don't know what they are and have to convince me to see them. Either someone has to tell me they saw this movie or watch this show. Um, I'd never heard of The Eat or Not. I recommended it to people to watch. It was
right.
totally original to me, even though it is a pre-existing property and people in Argentina know what it is. But and I love, or when you told me, when you suggested Hyperion and the Dan Simmons novels, I'd never read
hmm
them. They're very different. They're original, and I appreciate that. But by the same token, there's a whole lot of stuff that is known. It's either known because of pre-existing literature like Sherlock Holmes or Romeo and Juliet. I mean, my brain's all over the place, but I mean, is West Side Story fan service? Do you see what I'm saying? It
Okay,
has a
yeah,
reference to it. West Side Story, for anyone who doesn't know, is a musical that's based on Romeo and Juliet.
right,
So, I mean, on the one level, a lot of people don't know that, and maybe just like West Side Story, or maybe some Shakespeare file. Oh my God, they're making a modern version of Romeo and Juliet. I'm really excited. I mean, at what point is our conversation when we talk, not you and me, but generically, how much of fan service, and this is kind of what I was getting at earlier, is inherent to anything that is pre-existing to some degree or the other?
right.
And to what degree are we really therefore at that point debating not whether it's fan service, are we really debating whether it's original or derivative in some capacity, right?
Right.
And in that sense, almost everything you and I talk about on this podcast, on balance, although last week Blake Seven was a unique and new thing to you, and when I first saw it, it was unique and new to me. So maybe that's an example that doesn't fit what I'm about to say, but almost everything we're talking about is to one degree or the other derivative or so long standing as to have its own self-referential gravity well around it. And
Right.
all I'm trying to figure out when I think about this stuff is how much of it this is just whether it's just better executed or poorly executed operating within an existing property and how much of it is something else.
Okay, well,
And
here's my stab at trying to summarize what we're saying here. There is fan service in the sense of what gets you into the door
right,
of the theater, or what gets you to pull the book off the bookshelf,
right,
and that might be something that is very referential. Oh, it's
hmm
a new Superman movie.
right,
And that's perfectly legit, right? There's no problem ipso facto with that. And then you get into the movie theater or you crack open the book, and the kind of the core experience of reading the book,
hmm
or watching the movie should be something that is well crafted.
yes,
And I if you don't get it, like go back to Sherlock Holmes for a moment, if you don't get every reference to Sherlock Holmes stories like The Hound of the Baskervilles or The Red-Headed League or The Sign of the Four, that's okay. Like there are people, they'll get a little shiver of enjoyment that other people, in reading that book, wouldn't get, and that's perfectly fine. And here's another example. When I was in my teens, I discovered Japanese cinema. Still a big fan to today. Japanese cinema has a lot of references in it. That if you're not Japanese or you haven't
Right.
studied Japanese history or you don't know Japanese culture, completely
Shock how when
lost
the
on
walls fell.
you.
Right.
Exactly, exactly. But I still absolutely fell in love with the Seven Samurai,
Hmm.
Rashomon, Sanjuro, and a lot of the other sort of classic Kurosawa movies, but also from other directors. I didn't need all that other behind the
Right.
scenes paraphernalia to help me enjoy the thing that I was watching.
Right.
I think where that's that middle layer that's really important, right? There's the behind the scenes, there's the front entrance, and then there's the middle, the actual experience of what you're reading or watching. And that's where if the behind the scenes paraphernalia starts to populate the middle layer too much, that it does become necessary if you're sitting there to understand Japanese culture or understand the Sherlock
Hmm.
or have read all the Sherlock Holmes stories or watched a lot of Star Trek or you know read the Star Wars extended universe books, then that's where everything falls apart.
Hmm. How about we do? I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I still, in my mind, I keep coming back to the issue is about the quality of the thing more than anything else.
Yes, exactly.
Um, and and how much I guess of the infrastructure of the thing is built on references upon references alone,
Yeah.
or weird knowledge. How about I would suggest maybe we talk about bad examples, and maybe that'll help bring
Yeah.
some of this into
And I
focus.
and I think we'll get into the other aspect of fan service that you brought up at the beginning about the sexualization
Yeah, sure.
for hormonal teenage boys especially. Okay, so what was
Although
your
based on a lot,
what
I think it's a lot of middle-aged dudes too. But
so
anyway,
what it, yeah so what, what is the example of bad service fan service that kind of leaps to your mind immediately
so
when you hear
the
the
first one that
term?
leaps to my mind is Rise of Skywalker. Rise of Skywalker to me is appeared to be at least, and I think there's some evidence to suggest is the case, was J.J. Abrams overreacting to a lot of negative fan responses to
Hmm.
The Last Jedi, which I think is actually the best of really. Last Jedi is the best non-original trilogy movie, maybe better than Return of the Jedi in my mind, which may be sacrilege. I don't know. I'd have to rewatch it to make that conclusion. But there was all this reaction, right? There's a negative fan reaction to what Ryan Johnson did with the Force and with Luke Skywalker and with the Jedi in general. I thought it was a brilliant and very possibly rich vein to mine for future Star Wars movies. It was then shut down because people wanted, at least some people wanted, and I think there was
Hmm.
an overreaction. Again, to my point about my little experiment about IMDb and Star Trek, it's easy to go online and get a particular impression about what people think about these properties.
Right.
And this is a clear faction of very negative people. And let me be clear about something. You can like you, whoever you are listening to this. I'm not saying you can't like what you like and dislike what you don't like, and you can have reasons and we can disagree, but there's a really relentless kind of negativity
Hmm.
that seems to pervade conversations about it's not even like I want to know why you like or don't like what you like. I'm just going to tell you it sucks and don't tell me otherwise.
Well,
That whole
there are entire YouTube channels
yeah.
devoted
Oh,
to
absolutely.
how is this new thing going to suck?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm reacting not to having opinions because God knows I have opinions. And having opinions is fine, and I can deal with people that don't have my opinions. But and in some ways, I don't know. It may be clear. I think in some ways I'm a soft touch on some of this stuff, and that's fine. But but we get back to the last to Rise of Skywalker. It's like, oh, Palpatine's back. Why? Hell if I know. He's able to construct an entire fleet of ships in wherever that. I've only watched the movie once, so I couldn't name everything at this point. Why? Hell if I know. But and then you know we're gonna have and Rey's decided she's a Skywalker
Right.
even though she's a Palpatine, which also is annoying. Why? I don't know, man. So it just it felt like late. And to your
Well, talk
point,
about
right?
stolen valor.
Yes, yes. It felt lazy. It didn't
Yes.
make. I mean, look, I like comic books and pew pew movies. So I'm like, they're not always the most well constructed, plot driven, super well written, developed stories. And I fill in my own gaps and I forgive things. And I guess also this point of nostalgia, it's easier to forgive things that I loved when I was 7 versus things that I see when I'm
Yeah.
57. I fully understand that.
Yeah, that
Um,
groove in your brain
sure,
already exists and it's easy to
you
slide
know.
something down.
I can watch the worst TOS episode far more than I would watch the worst, say, even Voyager, which is a long time ago now. But I'm not rewatching season 4 of Discovery anytime soon. But anyway,
No.
or whatever season, yeah, 4 was the bad one. In both my view and IMDb's view. So but that's the one that it just feels like a response that's not
Yes.
was ill-conceived, and I think also speaks to, and maybe this is the problem, right? I think one of the things that continues to shock me about the sequel trilogy, starting with The Force Awakens, is there was not a plan, and that amazes me to this day. You're going to make 3 movies, you're going to make 3 movies, and you don't have a plan?
Well, and
That's just amazing.
this is the condescension in action that I was talking about, right? That we know we're going to get people in seats because it's Star Wars. So we don't need to produce something of quality,
Right.
right? We can just fumble our way through one movie after another, and yeah, the kids love them. They're Star Wars.
Go see a Star Wars. Here's $1.
Yeah.
Go see a Star Wars. It's a reference joke. If you don't get it, sorry.
Okay.
At any rate.
All right.
So,
Here's mine.
okay.
I would say there is a lot of new Trek that falls under the category of really bad fan service. And talk about the Substack for a moment, to plug the Substack, which we are required to do.
That's
I
right.
wrote a post about this, I brought up the phrase dead culture. Dead culture is when really it is all about rehashing the same stories, the same settings, the same characters over and over and over again. To me, for example, a lot of what New Trek turned into was, as bad as if you had gone to ChatGPT and said, write a story in which Q shows up and then maybe there's a cameo by Wesley, and how about Seven of Nine? If people like Seven of Nine, and anyway, so like the second season of Picard, there was almost no plot. It was just people like running
Yeah.
from place to place, and things would blow up, or people would get arrested, in the 21st century, or whatever. And there just was such lazy writing, or maybe these were just poor writers who were working their asses off. But it was horrible, and it just felt like, again, people are going to watch this because it's Star Trek. Same
Right.
thing with some of the recent episodes of Strange New Worlds, a show that I really started to like from the first season, and a couple of the early episodes of the current season just were, to me, again, lazy, as if you would put it through ChatGPT and said, how about this antagonist who was in one of the original series episodes? I bet if he shows up, that a lot of people will get on to Reddit and say, "Ooh, guess what?" Anyway, that to me is bad fan service.
So I'm gonna agree in part and dissent in part, and maybe we can go from there. But as to
Do you have a
respond,
comment more than a question?
it's really a comment and a question. First, uh, I have 6 of my own articles that I'd like you to read first, and then second. Um, so I'll start with Stranger Worlds and work backwards. I'm going to do.
Okay.
I will. So the episode I think you're most specifically talking about is Wedding Bell Blues, which is the Trelane episode, although it never named checked Trelane.
Yeah.
I'm probably I was sufficiently entertained that it doesn't upset me a ton. But by the same token, it was kind of a silly episode, and it really was in some ways designed to do exactly the kind of fan service that you're complaining about, which is, wouldn't it be cool if we finally settled this this debate in fandom whether Trelane was a Q or not.
Yeah.
Now, I think it was problematic for a variety. One, it's a very silly, very light episode, and I think, of course, that hits harder in the modern era because you only get what 10 episodes a season now or whatever the
Yeah.
number is. So one silly light episode is one less that I would rather see other things happening. So there's a sort of loss of other opportunity that I think is inherent in this conversation. That was less true in a 23 or so episode season.
Mhm.
And also, I mean, yeah, it's kind of fun in its own kind of way that it's cute at the end and all that, but it's in some ways an exact replica of the end of Squire of Gothos, which is a pretty cool sequel, continue equal of the whole
Right.
thing. And so, yeah, I think it's not great. And by the way, I looked because I was curious. It rates as a 6.6 in on IMDb right now, which is, below
Mhm.
the average. And other 6.6s would include, oh gosh, things I don't even remember. A bunch of Enterprise episodes. Plato's Stepchildren is a 6.5. That's from TOS and the Empath and the Mark of Gideon. Anyway, regardless, I think that's a problem. I Picard is weird to me in a couple of different ways because the funny thing about Picard season one, which has its problems, Patrick Stewart expressly said he would do Picard only if it wasn't a TNG reunion show.
Mhm.
So in some ways, Picard season one is supposed to be the opposite of this reference and member berries and nostalgia trip. But season two leans heavily into it, but it doesn't rate as high though because I don't think the quality is as good. Now you can argue that I think season three may be a little overrated relative to all of Star Trek, but it clearly is more entertaining and better constructed than season two. And it does rely very
Mhm.
heavily because it's a reunion. It's a reunion season. So
Right.
there's
But
definitely
it
that.
also fumbles the ball repeatedly.
It
Right.
does.
And I think a person in the writer's room should have pointed out, for example, like, oh, we brought up the changelings, we made them a big part of this story,
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
and then it just kind of fell flat on its face.
But you remind me of some of the other point that I wanted to make, which I'd almost forgotten. So thank you. Which is, and this is when the nostalgia thing is works in the opposite direction. So there's the nostalgia part where, oh, we get to see all the characters and we get to find out what they're doing and we get these references and isn't that fun? On the flip side, nostalgia also, in my opinion, makes us look back on the stuff we watched 30 years ago and forget all the nonsense, crap, and bad plotting that was evident then too. It's not
Hmm.
like Star Trek has never been in a whole season perfect. And well, I mean, I remember I thought about this the other day. I used to complain back in the 90s or the late 80s even at this point the one of the things that annoyed me about Next Generation, which is just true about all these shows at that period in time, is that we have 45 minutes of a huge, including commercials. Children. There used to be these on call commercial you had to watch, but that huge build up, really cool story, interesting problem, and then we solve it all in 15 minutes at the end.
Yeah.
And that's true of most of these. I mean, again, there's some great episodes and some lousy episodes. And I think in some ways it's weird that we then, I mean, again, like the Trelane wedding bells thing, it only really stands out to me, really, because it is one of 10. If it was one of 24, it may be less of a problem. And I could probably sit here and look down my list of, of is it really any sillier than the typical Waxana Troy episode of that was every season on Next Generation? Or some of the Q stories were really really good, and some of them were like, eh. And I would rather watch some of this nostalgia driven stuff than almost any episode of the first season of Next Generation because they're just not very good, really, on balance. So I mean, how much of all of this is so the recency thing goes both directions in my mind. Do you see what I'm saying? Or maybe I'm
Yeah.
just apologizing for this thing that I like. I don't know,
Well,
but
so it's okay. So let's run with Loxana Troy.
yeah.
I they brought back her as a character,
Hmm.
repeatedly, not just on Next Generation, but on DS9.
Right.
So if someone doesn't know who Loxana Troy is, she's sort of like the mother-in-law from Hell,
Right.
is as she's first introduced, and then she shows up a couple of times on DS9. And you think, well, is this just going to be pushing the nostalgia buttons? And there's actually, I think, a great episode where she shows her vulnerability.
Yes.
At the same time that Odo is
Yes. It's a
another
very good
character, for
episode.
those who
Yes.
don't know, is showing his vulnerability. And you really see her differently. And it stands on her own. You don't have to know anything about her
Right.
before that episode. She's just this broad character. Everything's at high volume with
Yes.
her, who comes on board the ship, and everyone rolls their eyes when, sorry, not the ship, the station. And it turns into this really touching moment, near the end of that episode.
No,
And
agreed.
that's
I,
good. Again, it's good writing, and you don't need to have the member berry there in order to enjoy it.
that is true, and that's totally fair. I guess really what I was referring to, I didn't pick on Lost on it because it was a nostalgia or because it was repetitive. It's just that often it was one of the comedic because there's these different
Right.
categories of episodes, right? There's the ones that are supposed to be the comedy relief episodes. So another
Hmm.
a good example of Q, and I forget which Q it is, but it's the one where they go to the Robin Hood episode.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just goofy,
it
right?
is.
Um,
Not my favorite episode.
no, it's not my favorite episode either. So I mean, I know how to win this argument. Oops, excuse me. I know how to win this argument though. I'm gonna win the argument right now. What would
Okay,
you rather
bring
watch? Wedding Bell Blues or The Alternative Factor? Boom, I win that argument.
it. Oh,
But yeah,
because
but I
it's
take that
I
episode. I think it illustrates the problem you're talking. I think it really does illustrate the problem you're talking about, and I agree with
okay.
you.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I'd rather watch Wedding Bell Blues than the Alternative Factor, except I would watch the Alternative Factor because of nostalgia, because I remember hating that episode
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
much.
yeah. That's also part of my point.
I
Yeah.
could go back and hate watch it again, and also, kind of enjoy the goofiness of some aspects of
Well,
it.
and then part of it, it's like, oh, it's Kirk and Spock, and I want to watch. I'll watch. It's on. I'll watch it. But it's not like when I'm going to dial up and watch,
Oh, hell
unless
no.
I'm trying to do it for some
Unless, I'm
strange reason.
really hate myself that
That's right.
day.
That's
I've
right.
done something really bad that day and I deserve to suffer. Any other bad examples? Because we haven't gone into the gratuitous sexualization aspect of fan service, which I think we mentioned with Carol Marcus in her underwear and
Oh yeah, well that
Star
one
Trek Into
fits.
Darkness. There also, I think there was like the '90s comics, with lots of cleavage,
Oh yeah, the
and
'90s
people.
comics is just yeah.
Sort of the worst example of that being the way that Rob Liefeld drew women, but he was
Yes.
not the sole offender by far.
No.
No.
No, not at all. You put on your list, and I'll go ahead and name check it. Star Trek Into
Okay.
Darkness with the whole Khan story was just that was just lazy. That was I don't even think it was fan service. Maybe it was, but it was lazy for sure, and
Yeah.
didn't work and wasn't smart. And you,
Well, and that My Name is Khan scene, I think
yeah,
that was clearly where everyone was, who wrote the movie or produced it or
right,
directed it or whatever, expected there to be this gasp from within the theater. Oh
right,
my God, it's
right,
Khan.
right,
And
right, right,
everyone, they either said, I saw this coming from a mile away,
right.
or now that it's come, so
Yeah,
what
no,
relevance does it have to this story?
that one I think probably is demonstrably attempted fan service that didn't work because there was a whole secrecy about, oh, he's not Khan. And the lying even. He's not Khan. He's whatever the guy's name was, John, whoever.
Yeah.
It was
John Galt.
all
No.
welcome to Gold Gulch. Um, yeah, I don't. It was just yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I mean, we could come with other examples, I'm sure, but I
Oh,
think
there's
that
lots of them.
all
Yeah.
fits.
And I realized that really putting together my list was in part therapy.
Sure.
Just things I needed to get off my chest. I'll just do one of them, which was Howard the Duck in the Guardians of the
Uh-huh.
Galaxy post credit sequence. And I only want to mention that because I loved Howard the Duck when I was a
Uh-huh.
teenager reading comics.
Right.
And I never wanted to see him translated to the screen. It's just one of those cross media ideas that really should just be completely cut off at its knees immediately. It just
Oh yeah. As I've
unless the
noted,
person was amazing at the job of writing, directing, you're just going to get a bad movie like the Howard the Duck
the Howard the
movie.
Duck movie is one of the worst movies of all time. I mean, I that one. So this is maybe where we get into this question of Easter eggs versus fan service. That kind of stuff doesn't bother me insofar as if you see it in the background and you know what it is, cool. And,
Yeah.
and if you don't, cool. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But it was featured, right? It said hang around,
Oh
in
yeah.
the
Well,
mid credit or post
the
credit, I
mid-credit
forgot which where
scenes,
it
yeah.
was to see this, and it's like, it wasn't worth it.
Well, that's inherent in some of these post-credit, mid-credit scene
Well,
problems
and this is
anyway.
the whole really, in some ways, very cynical effort on the part of uh, movie producers these days. I should say, the movie studios primarily, to put in Easter eggs, like this odd fetish people have for Easter eggs. Like a movie is you see the yeah, you see the preview for a movie, and then there's immediately some sort of video that comes out on YouTube. Here are the 101 Easter eggs
Well, yeah, yeah.
in that. It's like, who the hell cares?
I don't know. I don't mind. That doesn't bother me. I kind of like it, but I'm not obsessed with it either. So I take the
Well,
point. But I like.
I'm not. I'm more indifferent than taking umbrage at it. It's just, again, it's sort of like a substitution of you should watch this movie because it's
That's
really
fair.
good and exciting and thought provoking or whatever versus, oh, look, there's the Taskmaster.
That's right.
Yeah,
No, here's how I look at all that. I agree with you. If that's supposed to be the reason to watch it, then you've missed the boat. I
right.
like it, especially Doctor Who comes to mind. I like it when they name check or make some weird passing reference to something that happened 30 years ago, even though it has nothing to do with the story. Well, I
Oh,
mean, it's
sure.
relevant to the story, but that
Right.
stuff I love that kind of stuff, and that's being nerd. It's not really anything other than
Right.
that.
As I was saying before, I mean, it's in the background, it's behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah,
You can go through that and miss it, and nothing
right,
will happen. There's no ripple in your enjoyment of the the movie or TV show or whatever.
right, right.
Okay, so has fan service ever sustained or improved your enjoyment of something when it might have otherwise flagged?
I think on balance, the stuff in lower decks I think helps in enhance my enjoyment, not killed it. So killed it,
No, no, I'm saying has it
yeah.
improved your
Oh, improved it. Okay,
improved it,
I'm
right?
looking at the
Like
wrong question.
you
Yeah.
might not have enjoyed it as much, or you might have stopped watching or reading something.
That's actually a good. I don't think anything has ever like, oh, I was going to stop watching this thing, but it's doing the fan servicey thing, so I'll keep watching it. That's actually the best example I can come up with as I on the fly. I read your notes, but this question didn't stick in my head. I would say that so Doctor Who. Speaking of another property entirely, stop talking about Star Trek for a minute. I think it's arguably the case that the 360th anniversary specials that brought David Tennant back is at that point the
Hmm.
14th Doctor initially enhanced my enjoyment of Doctor Who. It was fun to see the actor back. I thought the way they did it worked pretty well. There was a throwback with especially bringing about his companion Donna that was really nice, and it really was very much fan service. I think in the sense that there was again, not to get off on Doctor Who spoilers, but part of the thing with Donna was that she was supposed to have to forget the Doctor ever existed and couldn't
Hmm.
ever see him again, or her mind would melt. And that's something that Russell T Davies took a whole lot of crap for many, many, many years. And so that was clearly changing that outcome was fan service of almost one to one. The fans demanded something, and a creator put it on screen, and that was all enjoyable. And unfortunately, though. probably the zenith of Doctor Who for me over the last almost a decade now are those three episodes. I don't think, and I don't think I liked Shutagawa as Doctor Who. I liked, and I was fine with oh goodness, 13. I can't think of her name right now. I have no problem with the notion of
Oh,
female
Jodie
Doctor Who,
Whittaker.
Jodie Whittaker. Thank you, or Black Doctor. None of that bothers me. Not in the least. But I don't think that her run was well written and well conceived. And I don't think that the character any good. And I think that Russell T Davies leaned way too heavily into his silliness for the two series we got with Shutagawa. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, he's not going to have another shot at it because he's moved on. But and so, but I think that particular three episode arc did inject some excitement into the series, but then was leached away relatively soon thereafter.
Right, right. Okay. I would say that I certainly had moments when I've been intrigued to re-engage with a particular property. I always hate that word property. What's a better word than property? Because
I mean,
property
it's franchise.
franchise, they're all such commercial
Yeah, well,
terms, right? And universe
but
sounds
this
so
is all.
pompous to me.
I mean, my
I
my
just,
my academic jerk is going to point out all of this is driven by the market, my friend.
oh man, you spoiled my buzz. So I would say that, like I read some, like I'll read a Sherlock Holmes story by, to go
Hmm.
back to Sherlock Holmes, read a Sherlock Holmes story by a modern writer and want to go back and reread some of the
Hmm.
original Sherlock Holmes stories, or I've, had the experience of reading a modern author's Conan story and then
Hmm.
kind of wanted to go back and read Robert E. Howard's original stories. That has certainly happened. It's kind of kept me in the game a bit.
Right, right, right. That's fair.
Yeah. So, okay. So, how about the question you started to answer, which was, has fan service actually hurt or killed your enjoyment of something which might otherwise have continued?
So, well, this remains to be. I don't know if it'll kill it, but it's damaged it. So, again, we'll do Doctor Who. And again, spoilers for the last series of Doctor Who. Um, when Shutagawa regenerates, he regenerates for some bizarre reason into Rose Tyler or to Billy Piper. This just feels like some kind of weird fan nod that I don't understand.
Right. And you're
And
totally out of ideas.
yeah, it just really feels like a shock for shock's sake. And again, for those that to shock those fans who know what that is, which is, Rose was a very popular companion, but again, from quite a while ago. From the Ninth Doctor and the first series of the Tenth Doctor, first one or two, I can't remember now. So that feels again kind of the gross fan servicey thing about all of it. And I think
Yeah.
to some degrees, I mean, it's diminished some of the Star Wars stuff has diminished my ardor for all this stuff. And Star Wars, I think it's probably obvious to listeners. Star Wars, I like Star Wars. I enjoy Star Wars. We gushed about Andor. But my obvious love is Star Trek. That's
Hmm.
so, and it's perhaps obnoxiously obvious, but there was stuff in well, the rises. I mean, the Rise of Skywalker is the worst example, but there's some of the stuff like I watched Kenobi was okay, but it also felt like,
Did this need to happen?
well, not only did it need to happen, and B,
Yeah.
including baby Leia and all, it just doesn't make any sense. It
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
I know. Because when I,
And
when I think of Star Wars, I think of endangering children.
oh well, sure, but I mean beyond that part, I mean narratively none of it makes any real sense.
No.
Because I'm not sure it's fan service, just this is stupid. Like Darth Vader built C-3PO. None of this makes any sense. So
Yeah.
the degree to which, so I understand the problem, and now I'm going down to maybe a non-fan service area. The problem with prequels, which prequels, I guess, by some ways, by definition, are also fan service, broadly defined. And Strange New Worlds is having some of this problem, which is you're doing things that people later should remember. But I also understand that that's just the way. I mean, again, I've read comics long enough to know that these things are malleable and they just have to be. And and it maybe it's silly to get too pedantic about quote unquote canon, because quite frankly, even human beings who supposedly are dealing with reality often are redefining what
Mhm.
they think is true about reality or remembering things differently. So, okay, maybe, to pick a stupid example, maybe we shouldn't make a big deal about one line in the Menagerie where Kirk says he only met Pike the one time. Like, do you really, when someone asks you, no, when did you meet Tom Grant? I'm not going to give them four paragraphs on all. Well, I first actually think I met Tom, and maybe I even said the wrong thing. Whether it's
Mhm.
anyway, that's cool. People don't always give full answers, so let's not get too hung up on these kinds of things. But but I've lost my thought at this point. But it's just
Right. We don't need to resolve James Kirk's middle name.
that, yeah, another good example. I was talking about Star Wars. I mean,
I
there
know, I
was
know.
there was
I'm just
stuff
saying that
in
the level
Kenobi
of,
that
yeah.
just did. The fact that Kenobi had this big fight with Darth, that's another example. A big fight with Darth Vader during the Kenobi show takes away from the fight that he and Kenobi have on the Death Star in the first Star
Right,
Wars movie.
right.
To a degree that why are you doing? You shouldn't do this. You
Well,
can
yes,
tell you could tell a story maybe that's good about what Ben Kenobi did for the 18 years between that movie and the other movie, maybe, but you can't include all the elements from the other movies because you're diminishing the overall narrative in
right.
my
Well, there
opinion.
are
So
no
those would be
stakes.
examples.
There are
Yeah,
no
that's right.
stakes
That's
because
right.
neither of them are going to die.
Right. Right. That's right.
So this climactic battle of the series is utterly meaningless. It's only
Yes.
there to say, "Ooh, lightsabers."
Sure. Well, and new lightsabers is, I think, fan service because
Yeah,
lightsabers are kind of cool. But anyway, yes, it gets a
yeah.
bit much after a while. How
Okay,
about
so
yourself?
my example would be the Book of Boba Fett, another
Uh-huh.
fan service example. Actually,
Yes.
we haven't introduced your new term. So bad fan service is called fanurbation.
Fenerbahce. That was I was very specifically referring to fanfic, but yeah,
Yeah,
there may be some.
fanurbation.
That's right.
So Book of Boba Fett, because the question I asked was, has it stopped you from enjoying
Hmm.
something that you don't want to continue watching or reading or whatever?
Right.
That's where I just said, this is this is really bad, and it
Hmm.
doesn't bode well for future
Right.
Star Wars streaming shows or movies. And it was a real leap of faith to watch anything else after that. It
Yeah.
made me think that the first two seasons of The Mandalorian were a fluke.
Right. So that's actually a good example. I watched the Book of Boba Fett. I didn't dislike it, but it was, again, I think does fit into this fan service conversation really, really well because, for whatever weird reason, Boba Fett, from the time he showed up on, of all things, and his reference to an Ancient Geeks episode, the Star Wars holiday special, from
Mhm.
that moment forward, Boba Fett's been this sort of fan favorite, right?
Right.
And without any doubt, the Book of Boba Fett was fan service writ large because it had to retcon the whole thing with the Sarlacc pit, right?
Right.
Then you had to make him into kind of a good guy. And of course you also had to have this. I mean, and more power to the guy for getting work, but we had to have the same actor who played him in the prequels, and it was just a weird melange of items.
The show that didn't have to happen.
Yeah,
Just
and
just just like Solo was a movie that didn't need to
I
happen.
I don't think I may not have finished The Mandalorian because of the Book of Boba Fett. It just sort of cooled my interest. Yeah, and
Yeah.
Solo is weird. I didn't. Here's the thing about Solo, and I watched it well after it was in the theater. I didn't. I was not as offended by it as some people were offended by it. I'm not even necessarily opposed to the notion of a sequel. I mean, I read some of them. You remember those? Was it Alan Dean Foster? There was a series of Han Solo novels that were set
No,
before the.
Han Solo at Star's End, I think was
That was one. There was
one of
yeah.
them.
They
Yeah.
were all right. I mean, they
They're
were.
okay.
I'm
Yeah.
not opposed to the notion. What I got opposed to was we don't have to know why you're called Han Solo because of some stupid thing that happened, or we don't have to explain why you messed up the whole parsec thing in the Kessel
Mm.
Run. That kind of thing. Like, come on, we don't need to do this.
Right. The only reason to watch that theoretically
Yeah.
is to fill in these blanks, but
Yeah.
I don't want to fill them in. I never needed the xenomorph's backstory
Right.
for Alien and Aliens.
Now, I'll admit, I would probably super love a Lando, a prequel, only because Danny Glover, what's his name? Donald Glover is just
Yeah.
so charismatic. But
Hmm.
that's because of the actor, not because I really care
Oh
about
yeah.
Wanda.
Yeah.
But anyway,
You just
so
kind of want to hang with the actor and be
that's
like,
right.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah. All right. Well, we've really been dancing around this question the whole time. Is there more fan service now than there was when we were young geeks?
I think absolutely there is. And I think there's at least two reasons. I mean, one is what I've alluded to a couple of times. I think it's inherent to any of this stuff, right? If you're going to produce, Star Trek over a 50 plus year period, going on a 60-year period, or whether you're going to produce Star Wars over a 40 something year period, or right, hundreds and hundreds of comic books, it's just inevitable there's going to be more reference and therefore more trying to service the fans that you have by trying to appeal to their maybe their nostalgia about the situation or just to make, I think it's just inevitable. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's just more to draw from, and I think there always has been some. I think it kind of more was in the realm of in jokes. Like I was reading an old sword and sorcery story by Joanna Russ,
Hmm.
and she makes a sort of a little side reference to a character from Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser series,
Hmm.
Fafhrd. And it's a cute little mention. Again, it is only like a little morsel. It's
Right.
not the whole meal, and it's perfectly fine. And that happened, a fair amount in the old days. So I would say definitely it was there, but there's way more of it now. And
Oh,
I
I'm sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and so this is like a segue into the question about is it really in the interest of content producers today to do a lot of fan service in the short term or the long term for them? Is that, a lot of this is supposedly driven by a commercial logic, but does that
Yes.
logic actually make sense?
Well, I mean, I think so. I think, and you may disagree with this. I guess it ultimately depends on what good means. Uh, as I get all academically again, I mean, the goal of content providers is to sell content, right?
Hmm.
So, what is more likely to get you to subscribe to Paramount Plus? Is it a totally brand new story that no one's ever heard of that may or may not catch fire, or oh, we've got the next generation crew back together again for a series? So probably in the short term, it's better for producers because it draws an existing audience in to watch a particular property. It's the same reason why they make sequels, right? To, why there are a gajillion James Bond movies or whatever the case may be. Now, whether kowtowing to fan service is leads to quality, I think is up in the air. It depends on, again, how good it's written and not necessarily because it's fan service or not fan service.
Hmm.
But maybe that may mean some of these things don't have the staying power that one might want them to have. But again, I'm not sure that does Paramount care how many views an episode of Stranger Worlds is going to get 30 years from now? Because it's diminishing returns anyway? I probably
Right.
not.
Probably not. Yeah. I think definitely in the short term, in the long term, it actually so fan service has become so endemic that now we're having discussions about fan service
Right.
and that people are tired of it, and these people are also tired of particular properties, there's that ugly word again, that rely on it too much. It's like, do I
Right.
want, after watching the Book of Boba Fett, do I want to watch anything Star Wars after that?
Right.
I think that's not good. I mean,
But
if it crowds out good ideas, if it gets people exhausted, then it's in the long term not good. I mean, you say 30 years, I
right.
would say 2 years,
Right.
like with superhero fatigue, right? It's like,
Well,
you
right,
know,
but I mean, I think then and I think maybe there still continues to be some slightly different self-conception that we both have about this term, which is fine.
yeah.
Um, because I think that part of what
Does
you're describing.
fanurbation work in the long term?
Well, I think to some degree what you're describing is a general problem of overproduction of genre properties in a way that has become more possible and more prevalent in the
Hmm.
contemporary era than was true when we were kids, right? So when we talk about the 70s and the limitations of mass marketing to a broad audience, three TV
Yeah.
networks, and the fact that it took 3 years to make a Star Wars movie,
Mm.
it was a different context, and therefore there was a built-in degree of constraint. But it did the built-in degree of constraint. Again, we can go back and talk about our. Again, I'm gonna try to win another argument because I guess I'm in a contentious mood today. Um,
Put up your
but I
dukes,
mean,
man.
that's right.
I'm
No,
ready
but
for you.
seriously, in all seriousness, so I would. I'll put it this way. I won't make it into a challenge to you, but you can answer it if you like. I would rather have the current glut of maybe mediocre Marvel movies and TV shows than Wonder Woman, The Incredible Hulk, the Bionic Man, the $6 Million Man, the Bionic. Those shows from the 70s, they were constrained in a variety of ways. They were constrained by special effects. They were constrained by three networks. I still find, I don't know, the recent stuff more entertaining to watch than that stuff was, especially in retrospect, right?
Uh, yeah, that's a much longer discussion. I mean, if you go back to that
Sure.
episode, I think it was made by TV studios who didn't love the material
No, of course.
and
No, but
want to do everything in the laziest possible way. I think that's what really made those bad.
well, I mean, maybe. I mean, I take the point, and we talked about it at the time. I guess my point is to use throw your own argument back in your face about the art constraints, though. This was
Yeah.
an era of constraints, right? The constraints,
Hmm.
there were constraints. There were budget constraints. There were special effects constraints in particular. There was contractual constraints as to what you could and couldn't use. And while I agree with you that constraints and artists can produce, they can force higher quality work as a result, but constraints can
Hmm.
sometimes just simply constrain. And 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 again, like I referenced earlier, I think we sometimes remember. Conversely, we remember with fond memory Star Treks or whatever from the past that really have a lot of mediocre episodes in them too. We just remember, in the pale moonlight and duet and,
Right.
and that kind of thing. We don't think about, move along home unless we want to make fun of
Right.
something, right?
Right. And there are other bad episodes.
Oh, there's a whole lot of bad episodes.
Yeah.
So, um, I don't know. I mean, in the sense, the positive sense in which I use this term, and to get back to sort of some things I said at the top of the episode, um, I am grateful, for lack of a better word off the top of my head, that Paramount thinks there's a market for Star Trek and they
Hmm.
make more Star Trek, or that Marvel makes more Marvel movies, or that even that Disney makes more Star Wars, even if not all of it is. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten Andor if we hadn't gone through Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett. So it's always ultimately hit and miss anyway. So if they're not if they're oh, I
Really?
think absolutely. Absolutely.
They had to
Oh, wow.
produce schlock before they produced
No,
Andor?
no, that's a perversion of what I just said, Mr. Tom, Mr. whatever,
Mr. Negative.
Mr. Negative. No, it's not that schlock begets good. My point, my point is the recognized demand by studios for particular property or type of property to be produced creates an environment in which various shows will be produced. And
Yes.
the varying quality of those shows is going to be predicated on a variety of factors, including the creators involved and various other issues that may or may not constrain them in their production. But if you hadn't had, um, I mean, okay, I'll pick on do the Star Trek things. Discovery opens up the door for the current era of Star Trek, right? There had been no Star Trek on television
Hmm.
since Enterprise left in whatever year that was that it left in the 2000s. There was almost two decade gap of Star Trek on television.
Right.
Discovery gets greenlit. I mean, I like Discovery fine. There are things I like more about it than others. Um, I would agree that, especially season four, which is the season where I'm like, I don't know. I know there's a new Discovery this week. When am I? I don't know if I really want to watch it. That's for me to say that means it,
Yeah.
must not be very good because again, of my professed love of this property or whatever we want to call it. But if you don't have Discovery and if it's not successful enough, you don't get Strange New Worlds, you don't get Lower Decks. I mean, again, you can gripe about Picard, but you at least get.
You create
I
an
would
create an
you create
opportunity.
a synergy
And
that
it was great that Tony Gilroy was there
yes.
to fill that space. What I would say, is also true is that when you create that space,
Hmm.
you're saying it was very easy to produce things, nowadays, and you have a lot of infrastructure in place because
Hmm.
there's money going into
Right.
Star Wars and so forth. That there is then the problem of filling that space,
Sure. Sure. Absolutely.
and the path of least resistance is to just keep recycling things.
Yeah, but
And,
I agree. I guess this is where this is where the divider is.
mm,
Um, I don't think that it's a question of fan service or not fan service. I think it's a question of some things are good and some things aren't, and some people are better at it than others. There's a permissive environment that's
yeah,
created by the studios being willing to invest in these things and also making money off of them, which is why I keep coming back to this market thing. Whether like it or not, this is true, right? If they didn't make any money off of it, they wouldn't do it. I wish art was produced for other reasons, but you can't make a science fiction show for free. Or
right.
you can try, but even then, it's anyway. I mean, we write for free listeners on the Substack, so read that for free. But
There you go.
this is free, so you can judge the quality thereof
Especially when we go on really long.
of what free means. But if there was not a, I guess this is I'll shut up after this. If there was not a desire to please fans in a way that will get them to subscribe to streamers, then we wouldn't have the good stuff, and then someone's just not going to be as good. And that's just to me the reality of it all. And so I am grateful that there is an interest in Disney to try to produce Star Wars shows, even if most of them, I mean, some I haven't even watched, some I may never ever watch. But you wouldn't have, and then I didn't even, maybe to your question before about has fan service ever led to you being less interested? I didn't watch the first season of Andor because I'd gotten burned out on other Star Wars,
Right.
right? So sure, I mean, and part of it is again the glut thing. Though is that I don't. The glut thing is maybe trying to serve fans too much, and therefore you create a glut. I don't know. I am at the point of rambling, and I will cease.
Okay.
The floor is yours, sir.
Oh, that's fine. And that we need to wrap up anyway. So let's get to our closing question, which is always about merch. Merch is such a critical part of the geek life.
Yes.
So here, we're not talking about any specific property, but what's the most fanboy merch that you have ever purchased that you would wear proudly?
So that I wore
Or
proudly at least.
or display proudly, or talk
So
about to friends proudly, or whatever.
well, I since you put this T-shirt thing in my head, I once owned a. Do you remember the comic book Mage?
Oh yeah, yeah,
So I had the shirt that he with the black T-shirt with the white thunderbolt on it.
yeah.
I had that and I wore that around, and I was perfectly fine with that. No one knew who the heck it was though. But
Exactly.
so maybe it wasn't
Because
surprise.
I
But I
don't know
just
here
thought
about your insecurities, Stephen.
it
Come
just
on.
seemed cool that shirt.
You just wear your geekery proudly,
That's right.
as people do now.
Yes. Now the
Yes.
thing that I well, what's your thing, and then we'll do the what we wouldn't wear. I guess
Okay,
is
so I had an Alex Ross drawing of Superman,
right.
kind of pulling open Clark
Yeah. Yeah.
Kent's
Yes.
suit. That
Yes.
that that picture, I had that on a T-shirt. I love that T-shirt, and I wore that proudly.
There you go.
Because I'm confident in my geekery, Steve.
Sure. Sure, sure, sure.
Sorry about that. Okay, so what would you have kept
So,
in a drawer, in the closet, in the basement?
well, it's something that I've ever owned. It's something I've been tempted to, but I also just would feel too self-conscious. I've seen a number of sweatshirts, often hoodies, or that are like the Star Trek uniform, various versions of the Star Trek uniform, whether it's
Yeah.
the TOS or the TNG. And part of me is like, I would love to wear this thing, and part of me would feel like an idiot wearing it in public. So that's the
Okay.
one that came to mind for me.
Okay, so I have something very specific in mind. I had a Star Trek shirt
Yeah.
that showed the original crew, Kirk,
Okay.
Spock et al. And for some reason, when the producer of this did the transfer, they
Yeah.
decided to highlight the eyes. So they all look like they had like glowing eyes and they look kind of evil. This was a hideous shirt. And so there's a whole backstory to this. So what I learned is like if you walk around the house wearing a really ugly shirt like that,
Yes.
the best revenge that someone can get on you is to start wearing your shirts. And then you're forced to look at them every day.
That reminds me, I do have a shirt that was given to me by a former colleague. It's there's a publicity still from TOS. It has Kirk, Spock, Uhura, and I think McCoy. There's four of them, and I can't remember who the fourth one is. And it's this silk screen shirt, and it's just this giant publicity still front and back.
Yeah.
I've never worn that in public. I've worn it like at night when I'm ready to go to bed, kind of thing. It's not. It does not leave the house.
All right. So on a future episode, we need to have a bet that whoever loses it has to wear one of those types of silk screen shirts
There you
or
go.
propeller beanies or whatever the embarrassing bit of apparel would be.
There you go.
All right, on that embarrassing note, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Adios.
Well, it's time to pack up our unfinished Millennium Falcon Lego kit and call it a day. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please go ahead, like, subscribe, or leave a review. And if you want to give us direct feedback, drop us a line at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. Look for us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. And best of all, check out our new Ancient Geeks blog on Substack. All content copyright 2025, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.
Get a life, will you, people? Crying out loud, it's just a TV show.